Hey guys, insight number 5. Now, I'm going to finish off here with Esther chapter 5, verses 9 to 14 and 6 and 7. Now, in 5, 9 to 14 is when Haman has come for that feast, and he goes forth with a glad heart because he's been invited and he's thinking he's doing really good. And he goes past Mordecai at the king's gate, and Mordecai does not bow to him, and he gets really annoyed. Goes home and talks about it to his wife and whatever. And then in 14, he tells all his wife and his friends that a gallows be made of 50 cubits. It's about 70 feet high, I think. It's a pretty high gallows. And tomorrow speak thou unto the king that Mordecai may be hanged thereon. So he's like, yep, I'm going to go talk to the king and get Mordecai hung because he disrespected me because I'm important. I am all this. He was like, as I said, the king's right hand man. Now in chapter 6, the king couldn't sleep, right? Maybe because of the fasting and prayer, who knows, right? King couldn't sleep, so he gets a really good bedtime story, and gets told of what happened, that it was Mordecai that warned him, actually of the source, that warned him that the two gatekeepers were going to kill him. So he's like, oh, Mordecai should receive some desires. I'm going to ask Haman about this. So when Haman turns up for this feast, Mordecai, the king says to him, what would you do for this really righteous man, this awesome man, that I want to give thanks to? And Haman thinks, oh, he's talking about me. So he lays out this whole, I'd dress him in royal clothing, I'd put him on your horse, I'd give him this, give him that, give him that. And the king's all like, awesome, call Mordecai. And Haman's like, what? And then in chapter 7, Esther, then with Haman and the king at this feast, she tells him, she gets up the bravery and tells him, in verse 4, we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. But if we had been sold for bondmen and bondwomen, I had held my tongue, although the enemy could not countervail the king's damage. When King Ahasuerus answered and said unto Esther the queen, who is he and where is he, and durst presume in his heart to do so, like as in, what the heck? How could he, and who is it, and where the heck is he, because I'm going to bash him down, man, he's gone. In 16, Esther said, the adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman, and Haman was afraid before the king and the queen. So the king gets up, the wrath, he goes to the garden place to think, what should I do? Haman thinks, oh, I'm going to have a go at the queen. At that moment, the king comes back in and sees Haman standing over the queen and is enraged. Like, what are you doing to the queen? Thinking that he's going to attack the queen, which he may or may not have been, I don't know, but it appeared that way. So basically, in verse 10 of chapter 7, it says, so they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then was the king's wrath pacified. Ha ha! I love that bit of the story. So let's look at this. Pride and anger lead to downfall. In this case, on his own gallows. This is Haman's story. Haman, you'll see throughout this, and just it's not good. And in chapter 8, Mordecai is honest. He gets honored. He gets the job of Haman. He takes his place. In verse 9, the Jews are allowed to slay the enemy. So when this edict from the king, because there's so many like little outlying places, and this notice has already gone out to kill the Jews are now allowed to defend themselves because they are in bondage in this Persian country. They are the slaves, so they're allowed to fight back, and a lot of people actually took pity on them, or saw them as, not so much taking pity on them, but saw them as, why should we kill them? There's nothing wrong with them. They're not doing anything wrong, and joined with them and actually said, no, we're not going to kill them. So they were saved. The nation was saved, and that talks about that. And they were really joyful and gladful, and they instigated a holiday which is still celebrated today called Purim. That's chapter 9, and chapter 10 is just Mordecai being Mordecai, basically, and getting advanced, and yeah, really good things happen for Mordecai as well, which is awesome because it's a happy ending for both Esther and Mordecai and their whole family. But let's go back to Haman being hung in his own gallows. So He's prideful in chapter 5, verse 9, thinking himself better than others, because when Mordecai didn't bow to him, he's like, oh, I'm better than you, so he starts getting these prideful feelings. He's probably long had these prideful feelings, but this is where we start to see it. Chapter 6, the king hears a great bedtime story, wishes to honour Mordecai, and it backfires on Haman and his pride, because he immediately thinks the king's talking about him, as I said, and he's not. Which happens a lot if you know prideful people. They assume that when you're talking about someone, like, oh, who would you name as your hero? And you start describing him and they're like, oh, you're talking about me. And then you say another name and they're like, oh. It's like, because they have that pride. Okay, chapter 7. Esther reveals Haman's wickedness and plotting. And then he has a go at Esther, and in verse 10 gets hung in his own gallows. I mean, talk about irony, right? Chapter 8, Mordecai honoured takes on Haman's role, and 16 and 17, and verse 16 and 17 of chapter 8 are all about joy and gladness. And we could look at like having joy and gladness, but we do that a lot around here. So I really felt to just talk about this pride and anger lead to downfall. And another good couple of scriptures to go with this is Proverbs 16:32, talks about anger and pride. So does Alma 5:28, and that's Alma trying to teach his son the same lesson around if you're going to feel prideful, it is going to lead to your downfall. It is not going to be good for you. Really make efforts to not be that way. So that's basically wrapping up that Haman's, I've just got in my scriptures the whole story of him getting hung on his own gallows. I'm just so good. Just a great story, and I'm just that's just so cool, because I don't know. I don't like people like him that think they're better than other people, that plot and scheme to take others down when it's totally unnecessary. I mean, it's the thing of the worst soap operas and the terrible villains, and it's all about getting their own way and getting more money or more power. And no, why don't you just be kind to people? You're going to get a whole lot better in life if you're just kind to others. If you're generous and loving, that is going to get you a lot further than pushing them down and bullying them. So don't do that. All right. So Ezra Taft Benson, he said, pride is concerned with who is right. Humility is concerned with what is right. So if we are generally trying to choose the right, or in what I would like to say is choose the best of the decisions that you have in front of you, the best choices, because we always have agency. No matter what the circumstances are, no matter how terrible they are, we still have agency. We can choose to stay alive in some situations, and in other situations we might be like, well, we'll perish or not, like Queen Esther did. If I perish, I perish. But we will know what is right because we have that humility. If we have pride, we're just concerned with who is right. And it becomes this argument with, well, I'm right. And you will see this in any of the soap operas you watch, whether you're watching Days of Our Lives over in America, or if it's still on. Here in New Zealand, it's Shortland Street. In Australia, you've got Home and Away and Neighbours. I think one of them finished, because I can tell I don't watch them. I think the worst of all is British, and you go to Coronation Street. Terrible. It's all about who is right and whose side's on, and I'm not talking to you because you upset so-and-so over there. It's all about who is right rather than what is right. Yeah, so think of that. I love that from President Benson. Right, well, that's the book of Esther. Honestly, it's a really awesome story. Just read the whole thing. It reads real easy. It's 10 chapters, but they're not long. And it's just such a good story. Listen to it if you don't want to read it. You can play it on your Gospel Library app. Play it on Gospel Voice. So cool. Enjoy that. Now, next week, and I'm going to take a little time to explain this. Next week, we move on to, I think, Job. I think that's where we go. That's next. Yeah, Job. There you go, Job. Now, Job's written in Hebrew poetry form. So there's a bit in the Come Follow Me manual that explains what Hebrew poetry is. Obviously, when Hebrew was translated to Greek and then into English, it no longer sounds like poetry, really. But Job, Proverbs, those, even Isaiah, it's all like poetry. It's written in poetic language. So there's a little section in between Esther and Job in the Come Follow Me manual that tells you how to understand this, what it is, why it's like that, why it sounds like that, and how to like make sense of it. So honestly, read that first before you jump into next week's study. It will really, really help understanding how it's written. All right. Love you guys. Stay safe out there. Hope you got something from this week's study because I thought it was amazing. All right. See yous. Mwah.